Hey, my name is Kevin Geary. I'm the creator of AutomaticCSS, and I want to welcome you to this Getting Started tutorial. I'm going to pretend that you are a beginner, perhaps even an ultra beginner. And I just want to scratch the surface. The entire goal of this tutorial is to get you familiar with the basics of AutomaticCSS so that you feel comfortable and confident diving into your first real task, which should be to build a small brochure website with Automatic CSS. The learning curve for Automatic CSS is about one small brochure website, so 5 to 7 pages. As soon as you've accomplished a task like that, you are going to feel comfortable and confident moving forwards, and your skills and your knowledge of ACSS are going to grow tremendously from that point forward. And as you're going to see, like the entire user base of Automatic CSS will tell you, once you built 1 or 2 websites with Automatic CSS, you can't ever see yourself going back to the old way of doing things. And in fact, when you do edit a website that doesn't have Automatic CSS installed, you are going to see how much you miss it. So let's go ahead and dive in and let's get started with this tutorial. So the first thing that I want to touch on are utility classes. Automatic CSS is made up of utility classes and variables. So we're going to start with utility classes. Utility classes are like CSS presets. They apply a very specific style instruction to an element. And here in this section right here, you're going to see how we can use utility classes to do a lot of different things. We're going to create a 3-column responsive grid layout. We're going to create some cards, and we're going to style all of these things purely with utility classes. And you can see here that you can do basic things. You can even do more advanced things. But we're just going to do a very common use case, which is creating a 3-column layout. And we're going to put like feature cards inside of that layout. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select this container that I want to use, and I'm going to turn this into a 3-column grid. And we're going to do that by going up to the classes area and assigning this grid, labeling it basically with some different utility classes. Now, in Automatic CSS, our grid utility classes all start with the word grid. We kind of try to make everything as contextually accurate and simple as possible. So I'm going to write the word grid, and then I'm going to use a double dash, and I'm going to establish grid structure here with a number. I want a 3-column grid, so my number is going to be 3. It's as simple as that. So I want a 3-column grid. I write grid double dash 3. You don't need to know how to write CSS grid. You don't even really need to know how CSS grid works all that much to use Automatic CSS to create simple responsive grids. So I'm going to apply that label, and you're not going to see anything happen to this grid because it's simply a container and it's waiting for us to put things inside of it. The minute we put something inside of it, you're going to see that we've actually created a 3-column grid. So I'm going to go ahead and add a block. And when I add this block to this container, you're going to see that it only takes up 1/3 of the container. If this was not a 3-column grid, this block would take up the entire container. But since we established a 3-column grid using that grid 3 class, we have a block that only takes up 1/3 of the container. If I duplicate that block again and again, you're going to see that I now have 3 columns to work with. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go back and select my container because we're not done. You can't just say grid 3 and then you're done. We actually have to determine at what breakpoint should this grid become a 1-column grid and stack content on top of itself, or what breakpoint should it become a 2-column grid. And what I'm going to determine is that at this breakpoint, we're going to make it a 2-column grid. And then at the last breakpoint, the small breakpoint, I'm going to make it a 1-column grid. And this is what's going to take us from a 3-column grid on desktop all the way down to a 1-column grid on mobile, thus having a responsive grid. And so I'm going to use the same grid class, except I'm going to add one thing. I'm going to target a specific breakpoint, and at that breakpoint, I'm going to change the grid structure. So I'm going to go grid M. This is the M breakpoint. All of these breakpoints are labeled. The smallest one is small. The next one up is medium. The next one up is large. And the next one up is extra large. And these are all referenceable inside of our classes. So grid M-2 would allow me to change this grid structure to 2 columns at the M breakpoint. You can see that these are all auto-suggested. So if I want to see all of my M classes, here they are right here. If I want to see all of my grid classes in general, they're all right here, so that I could literally go through and find the M's and then select 2 right here. Now, you're not going to see anything happen at desktop because this is a class that targets the M breakpoint. You would have to go to the M breakpoint to see that we've actually changed this to a 2-column grid. And notice I can apply that class anywhere. It doesn't matter what breakpoint I'm at when I apply the class. I can apply it anywhere. I can look at the S breakpoint and I can apply it here, and it's still going to work just the same. So now I'm going to do grid S1. So at the S breakpoint, I'm changing the grid structure to 1 column, and you can see immediately that that content stacks on top of itself. So now I'm going to go back. We have a 3-column grid at desktop. We have a 3-column grid at the L breakpoint because we didn't change it at that breakpoint. We have a 2-column grid at the M, and we have a 1-column grid at the S. With 3 utility classes, we've created a responsive 3-column grid. And again, you don't have to know how to write CSS Grid to achieve this. In fact, Bricks Builder, in the time of this recording, doesn't even have a grid builder in it. So you're able, with AutomaticCSS, to create a very complex layout that's hard to write with CSS for most people with 3 simple utility classes. That shows you the power. Even if you're a beginner or an ultra beginner, you're able to do more advanced things with simple utility classes like this. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that there's a gap between all of my columns, because I don't want my columns, which are going to be cards in this case, I don't want my cards touching each other. I want them to be spaced out. So we're going to use a concept called gap. With Flexbox and grids, you can create gaps between your content. Our classes start with the word gap because they're gaps, right? And so it's all contextually simple. So I'm going to just choose a medium-sized gap. So I'm going to do gap M. And when I apply that, you're going to see that I get a medium-sized gap between my cards. Now what I'm going to actually do is build out and style my cards really quick. So I'm going to go ahead and add a heading to this card. I'm going to add a text element to this card, and I am going to add a button to this card. Okay, so this is a very, very simple card structure. So we're going to say card heading, and then we're going to just grab some website ipsum here to throw in as our card text. And I'm going to show you how you can quickly style up a card just using utility classes. So the first thing I want is padding inside of my card. So I'm going to use pad L, and we're going to see if pad L gives us that's large padding inside of our card. We're going to see how that looks. I kind of like how that looks. The next thing that we can do is we can use our gap class again. I'm going to do a gap of S to space out all of my content evenly inside of this card. Notice that I'm not having to go into all of these different panels inside of Bricks to find out where do I place all of the styling and what units do I use, and all of these questions don't matter anymore. All you simply have to do is apply your utility classes, and everything is going to work out. Everything is going to be consistent. Everything is going to be responsive. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I've got that all done. I want to apply a background color to this card. So I'm going to use a BG class. That's background, right? BG. And then I get to choose from any of the colors, any of the shades, any of the transparencies in the AutomaticCSS color system, which we can customize. We're going to see that in just a second. But I'm going to keep this nice and simple. We're going to do BG base ultra light. So I'm going to do base ultra light. And I'll explain the colors when we get to the color system. But this is the ultra light shade of my base color. And then I'm going to apply that, and you're going to see that I get a nice, simple card. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to round the corners on this card. Well, if I want rounded corners, I should use a rounded class, okay? So I'm going to write the word rounded, and you can see my options here. I can get a circle. I can get large rounded corners, medium, small, XL, extra small. I've got all these options available to me. I'm going to go with medium, and you're going to see right away that I've now achieved rounded corners on my card. Next thing I'm going to do is style this button. In AutomaticCSS, which we'll talk about more in a minute, you have plenty of button classes available to you. Our main color and our main button for action items, and a button is an action item, is the action color. And so we're going to use button action to style this with our action color. And we're going to see in a minute how all of this is customizable, right? So you can dial this into exactly what you need. All right. And we're just going to say that this is call to action. Perfect. Now, I may actually want a small button here, so I'm actually going to do button S because I can actually change the size of my buttons as well. And you might say that, oh, that text is a little bit too small on that button. How do we go about fixing that? We can absolutely adjust that later. If you don't want a small button in this card, you can obviously remove the button small class, okay? So I'm going to delete these blocks because what we need to do now is take what we've done and duplicate it over into the other columns. And you can see that I've created a nice looking card, very clean and simple. I have created 3 of them in a 3-column layout. And if I want maybe 6 of them, I can simply continue duplicating and the grid is going to continue filling itself out. Very, very powerful aspect of CSS Grid. So I now have 6 cards that I've whipped up very quickly. I haven't been digging through panels and bricks trying to find out where to put various things. And I haven't made a bunch of decisions regarding how much padding should there be? How do I make that padding responsive? And as we see, as we go through the breakpoints, all of this continues to look great at every breakpoint automatically. I haven't adjusted my heading size or my text size or anything else at each breakpoint. AutomaticCSS is making this automatically responsive because of the way that everything is built and structured. So you can see with utility classes very quickly that we are able to achieve, kind of complex things, even basic things very fast, complex things very fast, purely with utility classes. Now, I will say there are a ton of utility classes in the system. What I would highly recommend you do is go to automaticcsss.com/cheat sheet. And this is going to bring up our full cheat sheet for Automatic CSS. I need to make sure. There we go. Okay. My internet's going a little slow. All right, so on our category here, you can break this out by, hey, I want to see all grid-related utility classes. There they are, okay? You can come down and say, hey, wow, what can we do with images? Let me look here. Wow, you can change aspect ratio of images. You can change the object fit. You can do a lot of different things with images here. What else can we do? We have different margin utility classes that we can use for margins. You can change the opacity of elements. There's a lot here. What I would recommend you do is go through the cheat sheet, read the documentation, play around with things, experiment. And I will say this, while there are a lot of things, a lot of classes in the system, you're going to find that you only use about 20% of them over and over and over and over and over again. Those are the 20% that you're going to memorize, and it's going to be easy to memorize because you use them so much. Then you're going to come into a situation where you actually need something you haven't memorized. That's where the cheat sheet comes in. But over time, as you've built sites with Automatic CSS, you don't need the cheat sheet anymore. I don't ever reference the cheat sheet, hardly. I've got a ton of users who hardly ever reference the cheat sheet, and it's because you're using that same 20% of classes over and over and over again. They're ingrained in your brain. You only really have to reference the cheat sheet when you're first starting out, or if you're trying to accomplish something that's kind of outside of the norm and you just need to look it up real quick. So in either case, the cheat sheet is there and it makes it nice and easy for you. So that's an introduction to what utility classes are and how they're used and how they make your life a lot easier and a lot faster. Now we're going to take a look at something a little bit more advanced, which are variables. So variables, which are also called custom properties in CSS, are like CSS tokens, okay? They reference a CSS property value within a certain context, and they allow you to control that value globally. For example, if you're creating a custom class in a page builder like bricks, and you want to reference a specific spacing value in the padding field, which I'm going to show you in just a second, you can use a spacing variable. And this allows you to hook into the ACSS spacing system when using custom classes or even when writing CSS and external style sheets. There are variables for many things in ACSS like spacing, colors, the radius system, grid structure, etc. So all I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this exact same card style and I'm going to build it with a custom class using our variables. And then I want to talk about utility classes versus variables so you understand the difference and why you should use one over the other. So all we're going to do here is I'm going to collapse this. I'm going to go into variables. I'm going to grab this container, and I am going to create yet another 3-column responsive grid, just like we did up top. I'm going to use utility classes for this so we can whip it up quickly. And instead of talking a lot this time, I'll just show you how it actually works. So I'm going to do grid 3. Then I'm going to do grid M2. I'm going to do grid S1. I'm going to do a gap of M. And now I have my fully responsive 3-column grid. So I just applied a few utility classes. I'm done. I'm ready to go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a block. This is going to be my card, just like I had here. The only difference is I am going to use a custom class. This custom class is going to be called card. We're just going to keep things really, really nice and simple. So I'm just going to say that this is the card. Now I highly recommend, you see this tip down here, actually in variables. So it says that pro users primarily use variables with custom classes. I also wanted to make a note here. I think I made it in this section right here, that I highly recommend the BIM methodology for organizing your classes when you create custom classes. And so I'm going to quickly show you that as well. So I'm going to add the same elements that we added before, which was a heading, and we had some text in there, and then we have a button. Okay, so I'm going to add that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give all of these items a class as well. So I'm going to use card __ heading. That lets me know that this is a heading associated with my card. And then I'm going to make this say card __ text. And this is BIM. This is all it is. BIM stands for block element modifier, BEM, block element modifier. I have an entire tutorial on BIM that I highly recommend you watch. So I'm going to skim through this, and I would highly recommend you go watch the BIM tutorial after this. Okay, so we have card text, and then we actually don't need one for our button, because even though this is a button in our card, buttons are buttons across the website. They all have the same global styling. So I'm just going to use our utility class button action. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add that padding that we had before. I'm going to add the rounded corners. I'm going to add the background color, but I'm not going to add these things with utility classes. I'm going to add them with variables, these tokens that allow me to reference the same values that I used up top with the utility classes. So I'm going to select my card class. I'm going to go to style. I'm going to go to layout. And in the padding field, I'm going to use a variable for our spacing. Up here, I used a utility class that was pad L, which uses large spacing as a padding, okay? So down here, I'm working in the padding field. So there's no variable for padding. There's no variable for margin. There's only spacing, because this is a value. And where we put that value determines how it gets applied. So if I put var, and this is how you write a variable, var, open and close parentheses, inside, you start with a double dash, and then you write the name of the variable. And in this case, it's space L. And you see immediately I get large padding. Why? Because I'm putting that variable in a padding box. I'm instructing the bricks to use this variable for padding. If I put this in a margin box, it would use it for margin. If I put it in a gap box, it would use it for gap. So you see that there's no padding or margin or gap variable, because all of those things are just spacing. And now we're just using a token that represents a specific value. And then I'm going to apply that to all sides, and you see that I get the exact same effect up here. And even though I used a utility class up here and a variable down here, the result is exactly the same value. They exactly match. Even though they use advanced clamp functions and are automatically responsive, visually, they match perfectly because they're both referencing the same value. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I am going to use a gap to space my content out. See, up here, I used a utility class called gap S. So I used S spacing via a gap instruction to create a gap between my content. Down here, I can take my card class, and on my row gap, I can use the same space variable, except now it's space S because I want S spacing. And because I'm using it in a gap field, I'm getting a gap between my content. See how that makes sense? Same spacing variable that I used in my padding over here, right? Except this was L and that was S, but same space system. I'm just using it in a gap field to create a gap between my content. Now what I'm going to do is go to Style, and I'm going to go to Background, and I'm going to choose my base ultra light color. And you're going to see that because I'm using Automatic CSS, all of my colors, all of my shades, all of my transparencies were automatically installed into bricks for me. All I have to do is literally go click on the color that I want, and I'm assigning that again to my card class. I'm getting the exact same effect as I had up top. Let me go ahead and grab this content so it's all perfectly matching. And then I'm going to do card heading, just like that. Okay, so that all perfectly matches. And now I'm going to do the border radius. So I'm going to go, I'm on my class. I'm going to go to Style. I'm going to go to Border. I'm going to go to Radius down here. And I'm going to use another variable. Up here, I use rounded M. Rounded classes access the radius system in Automatic CSS. So my variable here is going to be radius M if I want it to match exactly. And I'm going to apply that to all sides. And you see a variable here, a class up here, yet the radius matches exactly because they're both referencing the exact same value for that radius. And now what I'm free to do is I can duplicate this card across my grid, and I'm going to save, and I'm going to go to the front end, and I'm going to show you that we have, here's our cards built with utility classes. Here's our cards built with variables. And you cannot tell a single difference because there is no difference. They're exactly the same. All right. Now let's move on to the next lesson, which is begging the question of what we just covered. Utility classes versus variables. Like I saw you do it with utility classes. That looked very simple and very fast. I saw you do it with variables. That looked a little bit more complex. It looked a little bit more complicated. It looks like it took a little bit more time. So why would you use variables when you can just use utility classes? Okay, so to really show you this, okay? And I'm going to see my copy and paste has not been working well lately. I'm going to duplicate. Actually, I'm just going to, I'm going to drag this container down. Okay, so I'm going to drag this container down so that we can discuss it right here. I'm going to get rid of these two containers because we're not going to need them. And then I'm going to grab this container and I'm going to drag it down so that one is on top of the other. Okay, so they're right next to each other. All right, so I'm going to save. And now I'm going to show you. Let's say the client comes along and the client says, hey, we don't like the background color on those cards that you built. In fact, we don't like, if we want to go dark with these cards. And so we actually want you to change the color of the heading and the text as well. So you're going to need to make some changes to these cards. We also don't like the fact that you rounded the corners. We want those corners to be squared off. Okay, so the client is requesting a change. So we're faced with two situations. Did we build these with utility classes or did we build them with custom classes and variables? And you're going to see that we end up in two very different situations depending on which one we chose to do. Up here, we used utility classes. So I'm going to go ahead and open this. And here's my utility class container. I'm clicking on a card. You can see all the utility classes. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to remove this base ultra light, and I'm going to need to replace it with BG base ultra dark. And that's going to get us a dark card. The next thing I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to add a utility class. And this is going to be text white, because I need to make all the text in here white, but that can't actually reach my heading. So I'm going to have to grab my heading and I'm going to have to make that text white as well. And now I've kind of gotten there, but I need to remove that rounded corner. Okay, perfect. Now I'm going to save. I'm going to show this to the client and I'm going to say, hey, is that the look that you want to go for? And let's just assume that they say, yes, that's the look that we want to go for. And so now look at the problem that's happened here. You're going to have to go do that to all of these cards. Every change that I just made, you're going to have to go do that to every card. And imagine that these cards haven't just been used on this one section. They've actually been used on many different pages across the website. And so now you're not just faced with going card to card to card to card. You're now actually faced with going page to page to page to card to card to card, making lots and lots of manual changes and adjustments. Or you can do it right from the beginning, the way that we recommend, the way that the pros do it. You can create custom classes. We created, that's this section right here. We created a card class, and actually everything in it also has a class like card heading and card text. And now I'm going to make the change to this card style, and I want you to watch the difference. So for the background, I'm just going to simply choose base ultra dark. And for our text, I'm going to go to typography, and I'm going to choose our white color. So I'm going to go to shade, and here's white right here. And on my card heading class, I'm going to also make that white. So we'll go to the shade and we'll make that white. And then I'm going to remove that border style. Okay, so I'm going to go to border, and I'm just going to get rid of that border style. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And you can see that there's a huge difference here in efficiency, in scalability, in the maintainability of this website. The fact that I was able to change styles in one place and those styles automatically applied to every other place that this card exists, whether it's on this page only or a million pages across the website, I've made the change one time and everywhere has updated. Versus this situation where I have to manually go element by element by element by element for the rest of time to make these changes that were requested. It's faster to use utility classes on the front end, but if you use utility classes for everything, if you abuse them, what I call utility class littering, you're littering them all over the place, you're going to face a situation where the website is not scalable and it's not maintainable. It's highly inefficient. If you take a little bit extra time and attention when you build certain components, these are components you plan to use again and again and again across the website, then you're going to take a little bit more time on the front end. But on the back end, when it comes to scalability, maintainability, iteration, you're going to be far faster, far more efficient. You're going to love your life. You're not going to hate your life. You'll hate your life in the other situation. You won't hate your life in this situation. That is a tremendous difference. And frankly, it's the difference between an amateur building a website who would style things at the ID level, just with the bricks panel without a class, or somebody who just litters their utility classes all over the place. That's how the amateurs do it. The professionals use custom classes and use variables for their styling, okay? So that's the big difference there. That answers one of the most pressing questions that users have. Next, we're going to talk about granularity and zero limitations. It's very important that you understand the philosophy of automatic CSS. And I would sum up the philosophy in 3 sentences. Be insanely helpful. That's what we want ACSS to do. We want ACSS to be insanely helpful. Don't do too much. We don't want ACSS to try to do everything for us. And don't get in the way. We certainly don't want automatic CSS to constantly get in our way. That's very, very frustrating. So other frameworks, let's compare to other frameworks. Other frameworks, they try to do way too much. They try to get very, very granular. And that means they try to provide a class or a variable for every single use case. Automatic CSS does not do this. Automatic CSS does enough, and then it allows you to be a human web designer with a brain for anything that's more custom or anything that's more granular. And so this is one of the questions we'll get often asked, which is, where's a class for this? Where's a class for that? Why can't I just have a class that applies top padding to a card only, right? Okay, so let's talk about the granular utility classes, because other frameworks do provide classes like py-3, which applies padding 3 on the y-axis, or pt-3, which applies padding 3 to the top of an element. And you're probably wondering, what in the world is py3 and pt3? And that's yet another drawback of other frameworks in that they don't use contextually appropriate names. PY stands for padding on the y-axis, but this is like an inside baseball kind of terminology. There's an entire language that you have to learn in order to use these other frameworks, or they just don't make sense to your brain. PY-3, what is padding 3? I don't know what that is contextually just by hearing it. I know what medium is. I know what large is. I know what extra large is. Okay, those things make sense. What is 3? What is it relative to? I don't really know. And so these are things you have to learn when you use other frameworks, versus automatic CSS keeps things very simple. If I want padding and I want that padding to be small, it's pad S, right? I want padding and I want it to be small. So pad S. It's not PY3, PT, XZ. It's not all of this other terminology that is foreign to me, completely foreign. If you know CSS terms like padding and margin and things like that, you automatically know what our classes are called in Automatic CSS. If you know what small, medium, and large are, you automatically know how to reference the values for those things. So the learning curve of Automatic CSS is easier than almost any other framework in existence, even though the framework is actually more powerful than these other frameworks, okay? So you're not gonna find the granular utility classes. If you find yourself, here's kind of the rule of thumb, you find yourself in a situation where you need a very granular utility class, you're actually probably in a scenario where you should be creating a custom class and using a variable, because that level of granularity requires, it's probably going to be used again, right? Or you're in a situation where you could just style at the ID level. If that's the only thing you're trying to do and it's never going to appear anywhere else on a website and you don't have a utility class for it, that's a case for styling at the ID level. You don't have to worry about it because it's only going to exist in that one spot. If you need to change it, you go to that one spot and you can change it. If it's going to be a situation that repeats over and over and over again, you shouldn't be using a utility class for it anyway. You should be creating a custom class so that you have control over that situation globally from one source of truth, okay? So that's why there's no granular utility classes. And because there's no granular utility classes, the system is easier to learn. There's less bloat. There's less options. It's easier, okay? Next, let's talk about in-between values and standard unit values, because sometimes you're going to be in a situation where you really need an in-between value. For example, text L is too small, but text XL, extra large, is too big. And there are two ways you can handle this in Automatic CSS, as we're going to see in just a second. You can make sure you've chosen an appropriate mathematical scale. So if you need your sizes to be closer together, I'll visualize this for you in just a minute, then you can simply tighten up the mathematical scale that creates those sizes. That'll automatically make everything closer together and kind of give you those in-between sizes. Or you can create a custom size using a calc. All right, and this is a little bit more advanced. So we would take and we would create a class called text L plus as an example, and we would set its font size to be a calculation of the text L variable, because we have a variable for every text size. So you remember your text L was too small, but your XL was too big. So let's take your text L and multiply it by 10%. So 1.1. That makes it 10% larger. And let's assign that value to a new class called text L plus. Now I want to make it clear that I hardly ever have to do that. Almost never do I do this. But some people ask, and I want to point out that it is an option. You can do very advanced things with Automatic CSS. And so this will maintain the responsiveness of that text, but it'll make it 10% larger, and it'll give you kind of an in-between. And you can make that value whatever you want it to be. And you can create as many of these as you want. So if you're one of those users who wants way more granularity in your text sizes, you can easily do this while still referencing Automatic CSS's normal text size variables, okay? There actually is one more technique. We have a text larger class that you can apply to any text, and it'll make it larger. And you can control the degree to which that happens, whether it's 10% larger or 20% larger. You get to control that from the dashboard, which we're going to take a look at in just a minute. But in-between values are absolutely possible. They're not part of Automatic CSS by default, but it's possible for you to create them. And that makes the system, like I said up here, have zero limitations. What about standard unit values? Sometimes you're creating a gap between items, or you're creating spacing in a card, and you want very little bit of spacing. And you're like, do I really need a variable for this? Do I really need a class, a utility class for this? What can I do? Guys, there's no limitations. You're free to work outside of the system of Automatic CSS at any time. If you want to use one M or one rem or one VW or one VH or 5VH or 5VW or whatever you want to do, guys, you're free to do that. Nothing is stopping you, okay? Just make sure that it's an intelligent use of these values. And you know what you're doing, all right? If you know what you're doing and you know why you're doing it, you're free to do whatever you want. You're not locked in to forcing Automatic CSS to try to do things it wasn't intended to do. Let ACSS do 80% of the work for you. And if there's 20% that you have to do kind of off-road, right, or outside of the ACSS box, then go do those things outside of the ACSS box. We do this stuff all the time. When you're building complex custom websites, you may need to do some stuff out of the box. That's perfectly fine, and nobody is stopping you from doing that. ACSS certainly is not stopping you from doing any of that. What about additional colors or shades? So ACSS provides enough colors and shades for 95% of site builds, okay? 95% of use cases. However, there could be a situation where you need one additional color or one additional shade within a color family. And you could do this yourself. Again, this is like the 20% maybe the ACSS doesn't cover. You're able to do it yourself. I want to stress that I build fairly complex websites. I hardly ever have to do any of this. I never have to make another color. I never have to create another shade. But if you do, the possibility is there for you. So here's an example. At the root level, you define a new variable called myColorName, whatever you want that color to be called, and you simply make the value a hex code. That's the easiest way to just add another color that you can reference anywhere. What about creating a new shade from an existing color? I want to show you the power of Automatic CSS under the hood for advanced users. We actually have all of your colors. We have a variable for every instance, every section of what creates that color. So in an HSL string, we have a variable for the hue. We have a variable for the saturation. We have a variable for the lightness. And if you wanted to create another shade, let's say you wanted action medium light, right? There's action medium and there's action light. But let's say you want another shade called action medium light. You could define action medium light at the root level. You could create an HSL string, and in the hue field for that HSL string, you can use var action H. This references the hue value of the action color. You can do a var action S in the saturation field. This references the saturation value of your action color. And then instead of referencing the lightness value of your action color, you can simply set your own lightness value, such as 57%. And this will create a brand new shade, which is your action color at 57% lightness, which is effectively a new shade. You could also just use a custom saturation value instead of this variable. But we give you the variables so that for very advanced users and very advanced use cases, ACSS can still be referenced. ACSS can still be used in these cases. Again, I stress, I build fairly complex websites. I build websites that are $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. I don't hardly ever need another color or another shade. Automatic CSS out of the box handles almost every single use case that you can throw at it when it comes to colors. Okay, next we're going to take a look at typography. Okay, so typography is very important across web design. Very important for typography to be consistent. Very important for typography to be responsive. Without ACSS, if you don't have ACSS installed, you're responsible for choosing the size of every text that you're going to use, the size of all of your headings, and you have to control those sizes at every breakpoint. And this is one of the most frustrating things of just getting started with a website build is what are all of our values going to be? How do I create a nice heading hierarchy? How do I keep it nice and responsive? How do I easily make changes to these things if I need to over time? With Automatic CSS, you don't have to worry about any of this stuff. All of your text, all of your headings, they're automatically responsive out of the box. They follow a mathematical scale out of the box, and you can adjust the scale. You can completely override the values for every heading and for every text size if you want to. But the bottom line is that Automatic CSS makes typography management much, much easier. So here is a site out of the box. We have heading 1 down to heading 6. We have text XXL, that's extra, extra large. So text XXL all the way down to text XS, which is extra small. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to now present another thing that we have not talked about yet, which is, and this is a very unique feature of Automatic CSS. In fact, I believe Automatic CSS was the very first framework that allowed users to customize how the framework behaves and tailor the framework to their exact needs. And we do this through a dashboard that allows you to control all of these global settings, okay? So you have your viewport, which controls your breakpoints and your website's max width. You have a palette area. Here's where you customize all of your colors and all of your shades. We have a typography area that allows you to customize all of your typography options, a spacing dashboard, buttons and links, a bunch of different additional styling options, options for turning off parts of the framework that you aren't going to be using if you want to make the framework lighter and more efficient than it already is. We have a frames area if you're using our frames add-on for wireframing, pre-design and development, and accessible components. We have a form section for your form styling, which we're going to get to in a moment. And then we have your guides and all of that. This is yet another aspect of Automatic CSS that can feel a little overwhelming when you first install it and first look at it, if you don't realize one thing. And that one thing is that you really don't have to touch anything in this dashboard if you don't want to, okay? The only thing you really need to do is set your website max width, and then I would set your colors, because naturally you need to be using your colors, right? So you set your action color, you set your primary color, your secondary color. If you don't use these, like I'm not using primary or secondary on this website or accent, so I simply turn them off and I don't use them at all. But I've set my action color, I've set my base color down here, and that's pretty much it. Everything else is set for you, with a very general use case kind of feel. If it works for you out of the box, then that's fantastic. If you need to change things, you can always come back here and change things. We're going to look at the typography right now. So as you see, I have one thing that I want to hit on first is your base text sizing and your normal text sizes. This really controls this side of this column over here. So these are headings. This is text. Headings and text are controlled separately, independently from each other in Automatic CSS. So I'm going to leave headings alone for right now, and I'm going to focus on my text. And the first decision I make is, what is my base text size going to be? When I just add text to a page and I start typing, how big is that text? That is your base text size. It's your normal paragraph text size. You can control that right here. And you're going to see that there's two fields. There's a minimum and a maximum. On desktop, that's our maximum. What do I want the value to be? On our minimum device size, what do I want the value to be? Automatic CSS will take those two values and automatically make it fluidly responsive between those two values, between your max and between your min. It'll never get smaller than your min. It'll never get bigger than your max, okay? So instead of managing all these sizes at all these different breakpoints, you simply give it a min and a max, and you move on with your life, and Automatic CSS takes care of the rest, and it works beautifully and perfectly. So I have my base text size set at 18 pixels. Now you determine what your mathematical scale is. I'll explain the scale like this. The bigger the scale gets, like if I go from 1.25 to 1.6, and by the way, these are all very common mathematical scales, right? Golden ratio, perfect fifth, augmented fourth, keeps everything insanely consistent. But if I make the scale bigger, then my bigger sizes, XL, XXL, okay, the biggers are going to get bigger. The smallers are going to get smaller. And the base is sitting right there kind of in the middle. So I'm going to show you right here on this page. This is the base text. So these two sizes down here will get smaller as the scale gets smaller. And these, if I choose a bigger scale, the biggers, these three, will get bigger, and the smalls will get smaller. If I choose a smaller scale, then the biggers will get smaller and the smalls will get bigger, because everything tries to tighten up closer to the base. Okay, it's a little bit tricky to understand at first, but once you've just played around with the settings, you're going to see exactly what I mean. So for example, I'm going to change this from 1.25 to golden ratio at 1.6. This is a pretty major change here. And I'm going to go down and I'm going to refresh this page, and we're going to see what's happened now. And this actually is broken into two lines because there wasn't enough room for it. But you saw the biggers, what did they do? They got bigger. The smallers got even smaller, except for the fact, there's one caveat. If I go over here, you're going to see that in this text overrides area, by default, because we know that a mathematical scale, you choose a big scale, your smallers could get smaller, and they're already kind of small to begin with. They could get too small to be readable. And so we actually put protections in for your S and your XS sizes, your small sizes, so that they'll never go below these default values. And you can actually adjust these sizes accordingly. So look, if I want that small text to be bigger and this extra small text to be bigger, I can actually remove them from being influenced by the mathematical scale, and I can simply set manual sizes. So my base is 18. I want my small to be 16, and on mobile, I want it to be 14. And my XS, I want this to be 14, and I want this to be 13 on mobile. And then I'm going to save, and then I'm going to refresh. And you see, with simple changes in the dashboard, I'm actually able to influence these sizes independently. So now the small is just a little bit smaller than my base, and this is a little bit smaller than small. Now, I'm going to change my ratio back to a more common ratio. I'm going to do 1.25 again. I'm going to hit save. We're going to go ahead and refresh this. You can see that my text all updates accordingly. And now I'm going to show you an override that's very common. It's very common for me and for many users to want a very large, extra large text, but they want everything else to just be mathematically scaled beyond that. So you can override just your XXL. So I can say, I want this to be 60 pixels, and I'm going to hit save. Notice that I didn't even apply a minimum override. It's going to use whatever the default minimum was based on the scale. I'm simply overriding the max value, the desktop value, okay? So I'm going to save on that, and I'm going to refresh, and you see that I'm getting exactly 60 pixels right here. And this is actually converted, so it's 6 rem, all right? So we don't use pixels for anything. You'll see that when we talk about accessibility. But I'm able to easily override this, and I let all the others just follow the mathematical scale. So you have a lot of different levers that you can play with in Automatic CSS. You have your scales. You can even change your scale on mobile devices. So if you want a dramatic scale on desktop, but you want a very tight scale on mobile, this allows you to achieve that. Okay, I'm going to put this back at 1.25, and I'm going to go ahead and hit save. You're going to see that even though I changed this to 60 pixels, it's still responsive. Look at that extra large text. It's not giant. It's not running off the screen. It's become responsive automatically. It's going to get bigger as the screen gets bigger. It's going to get smaller as the screen gets smaller. Now let's take a look at how you can do this with the headings as well. So I'm going to go to fluid heading sizing. Guys, look. I have the exact same decisions to make. What do I want my base heading size to be? That's going to be my H4. So right here is your base. Just like over here, it matches exactly, right? These two are under your base. These three are over your base, okay? So I get to choose my base size. I get a different scale for headings if I want it, a different scale on mobile for headings if I want it, and then I can override all my headings. If I want my H1 to be 60 pixels at its biggest, I can simply override that. Where did my typography go here? Refresh. And now I have a 60 pixel heading 1. Everything else still follows a perfect mathematical scale. So guys, you can do whatever you want. If you want to override every single heading size and every single text size with manual entries, you can absolutely do that. And you still don't have to manage breakpoints because it's still going to be automatically responsive between those two values that you chose. So this is the typography control that you have within Automatic CSS. Now we're going to talk about spacing, because great websites have consistent, responsive spacing. Without Automatic CSS, you got to choose your sizes for everything: margins, paddings, section padding, container spacing, grid spacing, header padding, content spacing. What are the values going to be? And why are you choosing them? Are you choosing random values? Because if you're choosing random values, are you really going to achieve any sort of hierarchy and consistency and rhythm to your spacing? See, that symmetrical nature of our spacing being on a mathematical scale gives us that rhythm that we're looking for on really beautiful websites, rhythm in our typography, rhythm in our spacing. This is all achieved automatically with Automatic CSS, where without Automatic CSS, there's a lot of manual decisions that you're going to have to make, and you got to be very careful when making those decisions. And most people aren't. That's why most websites out there, the spacing is very inconsistent. The typography is inconsistent. There's a lot of problems with flow and symmetry and rhythm. And so we want to make sure that we are understanding how Automatic CSS takes care of all of this for you. So first of all, unlike other frameworks, this is very unique to Automatic CSS. Automatic CSS gives you different spacing applications depending on the context. So for example, a section of content needs to have more padding than a normal element would have, right? So a normal card for large padding, if you put that large padding that's on a card inside a section, it would be way too small. People would be wondering, why is your content so close to the top of your section? You need more padding when you're working in sections. Also, when you're working with a card, you typically want the same padding on all sides. But if you use the same padding on all sides of a section, and in one section you use L, and another section you use M, on mobile devices, your content is going to be misaligned. I'm going to show you this right here. So here's a card, which uses pad M, medium padding inside this card. So medium on the top, medium on the bottom, medium on the left, medium on the right. This is a section that uses pad section M, which is section medium padding on the top and the bottom. And then on the sides, it uses a completely different value. And this value actually references your website's gutter padding. Okay, it's the left and right site padding, basically. We call it section padding, left and right section padding. There's a variable for it called section padding X, for the X-axis section padding. And what you're going to find is that it doesn't matter if you use pad section M or pad section L. So let's do pad section L. So now I get large section padding, but look, the left and right, always exactly the same, so that when I have content, as you see on this page, see this content and this content, they're all in perfect alignment. If I were to take this section right here that I'm working in, and I will literally apply pad section, actually it's got a class on it. And yeah, no, I didn't even apply custom padding here. So I'm going to do pad section XL, and that's going to give me XL padding in this section. But notice left and right, my content did not come out of alignment with all of my other content. Even as I go down through the different breakpoints, my content is always in perfect alignment, because the application of section padding only applies to the top and bottom of this section container, and it retains always my gutter padding on my website. And I want to show you in Automatic CSS back here for spacing, you actually have, it's called side padding, that's your gutter padding, control over what that value is. So on mobile, I only want 24 pixels of side padding. So when I come down on a mobile device, look, and it's hard to tell on this because I have this custom counter for our sections, our lessons here. But see this side padding right here? That's 24 pixels. As I come up here, it's going to be a little bit bigger. As I come up here to the next breakpoint, it'll be a little bit bigger. And as I get to desktop, you won't even see it because the edge of the screen is way off to the side, right? But if I wanted to change this to be, let's say 40 pixels on mobile, I can absolutely change that. Let's do a little refresh here. And we're gonna let me save our work. Let me reload. And now we're gonna see that that gutter on mobile is actually wider. Look at it, it's wider, it's wider. There's more space between the end of the content and the edge of the screen. Now, most people don't wanna do that. They wanna kind of keep it really narrow. You could even do 20 pixels. And then on a laptop, we can make it be 80 pixels or whatever. This is never gonna apply to desktop because desktop's too wide to ever see the side padding. But on a laptop, this number comes in very handy because you don't want the content almost touching the edges of the laptop screen. That doesn't look good. So you can control the size of that gutter for your website through this padding right here, and it's all fluid and it's all responsive. I'm gonna set that back to 60 and we're gonna save. Okay, let's go back and take a look at one more thing. So I'm gonna go back down to our spacing section here. Header padding, because a header is kind of like this box right here. You don't need a lot of padding in your sections. Oh, and I want to come back to section padding in just a second for one more thing. You don't need a lot of padding in your headers, but you can't have symmetrical padding in your headers. You need, this is pad header M right here, which gives me top and bottom M padding, just like here, except on the left and the right, what does it give me? my section left and right padding, that gutter, so that my header is always in alignment perfectly with all of my section content. This is the level of thought and attention to detail that we've put into Automatic CSS so that you don't run into constant issues that other frameworks and other websites create, okay? So we've given you all of these different areas for contextually applying different types of padding and spacing. Of course, there's margins, there's gaps, there's all this stuff that you can do with Automatic CSS, okay? All right. So with our section padding, I wanted to touch on one more thing. We're going to go back here. People wonder how that section padding is calculated, and it's very simple. It's simply a multiple of the normal spacing system in Automatic CSS. And by the way, just as you did with your headings, with your text, you can control your spacing values. Everything is mathematically scaled. There's a base size. You can set your base, you can set your scales, and then for desktop, it's simply multiples. So if I want to tighten everything up, right? The default here is 4 times my normal spacing value. So my base size, which is 30 pixels, section padding would be 4 times that. So it would give me 120 pixels top and bottom in every section that I have by default, okay? If I want that to be 3 times, so I don't want it to be 120, I want it to be 90, I change that to 3. I can even control this differently on mobile so that everything's even tighter on mobile. I could change this to 2, and I could change this to 1.5, or I could change this to 2.5. And I'll go ahead and save. We'll refresh, and I want you to see that all of my section padding is going to tighten up. See how it tightened up a little bit? It's because it went from 120 down to 90. All I'm doing here is changing the desktop multiplier. I'm going to set it back to our 4 and 3, which is our default. And I'm going to go ahead and save. And now look there's more padding there. Small changes, but they make a difference. And it gives you that granular level of control that you want over things like section padding and all of your spacing. If I were to change this scale, all of my gaps, all of my margins, all of my padding, the biggers would get bigger, the smallers would get smaller, or I can tighten everything up, I can loosen everything up. These are just different levers that you have available to you for dialing in the framework globally across the website to whatever you need. And the fantastic thing about this, guys, you don't need to make these decisions ahead of time. You can change these levers and play with these levers after a website is even completely built. And it's still not going to break anything. Everything is still going to be very responsive. You don't have to go page by page by page. It is the most control out of any framework that has ever been created. And like I said in the beginning, if this stuff intimidates you right now, don't even touch it. You don't have to touch it. You don't have to make any decisions about it. All right, let's keep going. So now we're going to go down and we're going to talk about color management. ACSS allows you to change your colors. Obviously, we talked about that. It also allows you to adjust your shades. This is my action color. This is my action medium. You can see I'm using classes right here, action medium. Here's my action dark. Here's my action ultra dark. I want to take for a minute this concept of dark. And you can see that there's some variance here, obviously, between dark and ultra dark. What if I wanted my dark to be a bit closer to my ultra dark? Is that achievable, and how easy is it in Automatic CSS? So I'm going to go back in the dashboard to my action color, and I'm going to click Edit Action Shades. And I see that my ultra dark, these are the lightness values. That really controls most of the shading. You can also adjust your saturation values here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make, see, ultra dark is 10%. If I make 25% closer to 10, it's going to darken up this dark color. So I'm just going to do 15 and I'm going to hit save. And with that one change, when I go to the front end of my website, here's my dark, here's my ultra dark. Now when I refresh, I want you to watch. Look how that became darker to more closely match this ultra dark. I'm going to take this medium right here and I'm going to change it as well. We see that medium is currently 50%. I'm going to make that more towards my light value. My light is 85. I want this to be a little bit under my light. So I'm going to make it 75 and I'm going to hit save. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to refresh and watch this medium box change. Now it is more closer to my light over here. What if it's got a little too much saturation with it, right? So I can even take my saturation and I can drop it down to 50. I'm not influencing any of my other colors. I'm only changing that one color. So now I've desaturated it a little bit. I can adjust my colors. I can adjust every shade that I have available to me to where I can dial everything in perfectly. Okay, if you have hex codes that you're given that you're trying to match, simply take the hex code, Google it, right? 32456. I don't even know if this is a real hex code. I would actually need another value there. There you go. It's going to give you the HSL values. It's going to tell you, here's the saturation percentage, here's the lightness percentage for this color. So you can go back in here and you can use these to reference. It's going to auto detect whatever color you put in, right? You put in a hex code right here. It fills out the saturation. It sets the lightness for all the shades. And then you can go in and make whatever tweaks you want to make. And that is completely up to you. I just want to show you the powerful nature of customizing shades. You also have all the dark transparencies available to you, all the light transparencies available to you, all via custom, utility classes, and all via variables as well. Also in bricks, one thing which we already touched on, but important to note, everything is preloaded for you into categories. Here's all your action, all your primary. You can see I have primary turned off, so there's nothing there. But under action, we have ultra light, light, medium, dark, ultra dark. I'm going to go down here. You're going to see transparent versions, ultra dark transparent versions, light transparent versions. So many options available to you right here inside these color pickers or with all of your variables. Very, very easy to reference. Okay, the next thing we're going to look at is buttons and links, because AutomaticCSS gives you tremendous control over the styling of both your buttons and links, and allows you to quickly shift button and link styling depending on the situation. So we already saw how we can create an action button. Button, action. We now need to see how I can take a button action and make it an outline button by stacking another class on it called button outline. And immediately I have an outline button. We can also see that if I'm in a situation where I need a black button, I can simply say button black. Or I can reference my base color. So I'm going to remove this one. And I'm going to say I need a base colored button. Button base gives me a base colored button. Okay. Now let's go back in the back end and let's see how we can adjust our button styling, because AutomaticCSS once again comes to the rescue and gives you so much control over your buttons. I have a button minimum width right here. I'm going to turn that off. We're going to say 0 is the minimum. I'm going to hit save and we're going to refresh. And now you're going to see that my buttons will only be as long as the text that is inside of them. But if I have a very short button, like I'm going to make this one just say action, okay? I'm going to go to the front end. I need to refresh the builder. I'm going to go to the front end and look how it got shorter. But if I want all my buttons to have a minimum width of like 150, I can come in, I can set that as my minimum width, and it's going to at least be 150 pixels wide, and then it'll still get bigger as the text gets bigger. That's one setting. I also have button padding available to me. What if I want 2em of padding on the left and right? What if I want 3em of padding on the left and right? What if I want 1em of padding on the y-axis, top and bottom? Can I do that? Let's refresh. Look, I just got more padding inside all of my buttons. What if I wanted to do 2em? Just so you guys can see more of a change here. I'm going to refresh. Look at all that padding. You have complete control over this right from your dashboard. And guys, that's every single button that you use. Doesn't matter the color, doesn't matter anything else. It's all going to have the same padding. Your outline buttons are all going to change, so everything stays consistent. You can change the line height of your text, the letter spacing, the font weight, the font style, the text transform. You can choose the text decoration. You can do your buttons, borders, okay? So all of this is available to you. Same thing with your links, your default link color, your default link hover color. Down here with your primary buttons, your secondary buttons. See, I'm using action. I can open the action button styling, and now these things will influence only my action buttons. I can change my background color, my hover background color. See my text color right now? Feel like that's a little light? Maybe we should be using dark text instead. I can, instead of doing action ultra light for my text color, I can do action ultra dark, or even just action dark. And that'll reference the shade, the dark shade. So I'm using a color for my text that's in the same family as the button color. And this allows us to have dark text, but it's still in the same family. So it's not just being a dummy and putting like dark, just random black text on a button. It's actually part of that family. See how the text turns white when I hover? Well, I actually have control over that. I want the hover text color to match my normal text color. So I'm gonna set them both to action dark, save, refresh. Now when I hover, look at that. The text does not turn to white, okay? What if I want a radius on all of my buttons? I'm gonna go to button border styling, button radius. I'm gonna say, give me 1 right? Save. I'm gonna go back to the front end. Watch, all my buttons now have 1 of rounded corners. What if that's too much? What if I want, 5 pixels? I can do that. Save. Let's go back. You can use whatever units you want to use in these fields. You can even use a radius variable from AutomaticCSS. So we'll save that, we'll refresh, and that actually looks exactly the same as what I was just using a second ago, 5 pixels, okay? So you can use whatever values you want to use there. So we have control over our buttons, control over our links, control over individual buttons. If you're not using the secondary buttons, go ahead and turn them off. Not using accent, turn them off. Not using base, turn it off. Not using black or white, turn it off. This is going to lighten the framework and make everything more efficient, okay? Oh, let's take a look at links. We didn't actually look at them. So I'm going to grab the link here, and I can say this is an action link, which is the default. What about a different color link? I need a base colored link. So I'm going to do link base. It's going to change it to link base right there. If I want a larger link, I can go link base, and I can say I need this link to be large. So I'm going to use text L, which also works on links, to make the text a little bit larger. So now I've got a larger link that is also colored as base. Very, very flexible, very powerful. Also, before we move out of this section, you can see the tip right here. AutomaticCSS includes button-specific variables, so you can easily design custom buttons while still referencing any of your global button values. I'm not going to show you that right now. Go read the manual, because if you do want to create custom buttons, you are not held back by AutomaticCSS. We have button-specific variables you can use, and you can do anything that you want. Okay, let's look at the next one. Form styling. All right, this is really, really powerful because forms, guys, are very complicated to style, and ACSS just makes it easy. And once you've styled it the way you want, you use one simple class to style every form across your website. So I'm going to take this form, which is a normal bricks form, and I'm going to apply form _light. You have 2 styles of forms in AutomaticCSS, a light form and a dark form. Light is for use on light backgrounds, dark is for use on dark backgrounds, okay? Notice that when I applied that, it instantly changed how my form looks. This is what it looks like out of the box. This is what it looks like out of the box with AutomaticCSS. Now, do I have control over these things? Absolutely. You go over to the Forms panel, you have control over all of the styling of your labels, your legends, your field and field sets, your inputs, your global and submit button styling, your secondary button styling, your option input styling. Every part of these forms is customizable right here by setting simple values. Okay, so let's say you want this button only on your forms to be uppercase text, just to show you how granular this panel is back here. So I can go to global and submit button styling. I can scroll down and find the text transform, uppercase, save, and then I'll go back to the front end, and only my form buttons now have uppercase text. That's how granular you have control over these forms. You can change the input border, okay? So let's go to our input styling right here, and let's change the border width. So I would like 3 pixels on all sides. Actually, so here's my top and bottom. I want top to be 1, everything to be 1 except the bottom, okay? So I'm gonna hit save. The bottom is gonna be 3. So I'm gonna refresh, look at that. Now I have a thick bottom and normal on all other sides. That is the granular nature of form styling with AutomaticCSS. We make it so very easy. And then once you've got it styled the way you like, you have another form somewhere else, you apply the form like class, it's gonna look exactly the same. Okay, let's continue, let's move on. Fixed paragraph and heading spacing. There's a lot of stuff in automatic CSS that just is a quality of life feature. And this is one of them. So we have situations where we want even spacing on the pages that we're designing, right? So if I have a little paragraph here and a heading here and paragraph down here, I want all these evenly spaced. And I do that with a gap class or a gap variable. We already saw us do this. The problem is when you turn these things into actual paragraphs, the builders and even browsers, they like to apply extra spacing, extra margin on your paragraphs and things like that. And so without automatic CSS, this section right here, let's go down and refresh. Without automatic CSS, this would look really bad. I'm going to show you how it would look. So we're going to go to typography, and there's a little under right here, body styling, fix paragraph and heading spacing. Notice I have it on. You definitely want this on, because if I turn it off, I'm going to hit save. This is what life looks like without automatic CSS. Look at this. The spacing is all off. This paragraph and this heading are given extra spacing by bricks and browsers and things like that. And you're not allowed to have even spacing when you're using page builders without automatic CSS, if you're trying to use gap techniques and things like that. So with automatic CSS, you say, hey, that's a problem. Fix it. So I hit save. Now I refresh and it's fixed. And now I have even spacing because we apply an intelligent spacing technique. It's a kind of an advanced technique. You don't even need to know how it works. You just hit the toggle and it's all fixed for you. It's a quality of life feature that other frameworks simply do not have, do not offer, do not even think about. The next area we're going to look at is accessibility. So accessibility is a very important topic. It's rapidly becoming more and more important as each day passes. Pretty soon, accessibility is going to be an SEO ranking factor. It's going to be a conversion optimization factor. In many countries, it's already a legal factor, and it may be a legal factor coming into other countries very soon. Automatic CSS is the first framework to really care about accessibility and to provide helpful accessibility-related features. We're just going to do a quick overview. For example, with animations. If you're trying to use animations on your site and they aren't working, make sure you don't have prefers reduce motion turned on in your operating system settings, because automatic CSS respects users' preferences for motion. And if we detect that you have asked for reduced motion, automatic CSS will turn off motion, which is animations for those users. So they won't see them. We respect their preference. This is not something you have to set up. Automatic does this for you automatically out of the box. What about relative units? All units in automatic CSS are accessible. We don't use pixels for anything. Even when you're in the dashboard and you set something like to 10 pixels, it's going to convert it to rem units for you. It's going to convert it to a relative value because accessibility matters and pixel units are not accessible. So automatic CSS, once again, has your back. What about tab focus, keyboard navigation, and skip links? You automatically, everything that's an actual button or link, okay, see these links right here? They have keyboard focus. And that focus style is automatically your website's action color. And you actually have control over this under additional styling accessibility. You can customize the offset of that outline, the color of that outline effect. But automatic CSS provides this for you out of the box. It's a very important accessibility feature. Pure CSS smooth scrolling to hash links, okay? So if you're in here and you have your scroll styling, we have under options, smooth scrolling, enable CSS smooth scrolling. Highly recommend you turn this on and then don't use JavaScript smooth scrolling. So you know when you click a link that's going to take you to another part of the page and it animates the scroll down? A lot of sites, a lot of page builders, they use JavaScript to accomplish that. That's not accessible. You should turn that off and you should turn on CSS smooth scrolling. And the minute you turn it on in automatic CSS, it's going to replace that with CSS only smooth scrolling, which is perfectly accessible. So again, another quality of life / accessibility feature to help you. What about visually hidden text? Hiding text for sighted users while retaining the text for screen readers is an important technique in modern web design. In automatic CSS, we provide a class called Hidden Accessible that allows you to hide text for accessibility purposes. I'm going to demonstrate that right now. So I'm going to come down. I'm going to hide this text. I'm going to add hidden accessible. And that's going to hide the text, but it's also intelligent enough to add a little indicator to let you know that that text is hidden. So when you're in the builder, you know there's something there, but it's visually hidden. And on the front end, when I refresh, you can't see it at all, and you can't see the indicator. Again, this is the attention to detail that's been put into this framework. What about clickable parent links? I want you to watch my tutorial on clickable parents, but this is a very, very important accessibility tactic that you're going to use when you're creating cards and full clickable elements inside of a page builder. Too much for this little overview, but I have plenty of tutorials demonstrating this. Okay, we've reached the end. Let's talk about putting it all together. I want you to take everything you've seen in this tutorial, and I want you to remind yourself of one thing, that big panel you saw back there, that dashboard, none of that really has to be touched to get started. All of the classes in this cheat sheet, you're going to see there's over 1,000 classes in Automatic CSS. You don't have to worry about all of those. What you need to do, and we also have the variables versus utility classes, what you need to do is commit to this. Commit to building one 5-page website with Automatic CSS. Pull up the cheat sheet. Pull up a blank install. Spend a weekend building a quick brochure site with Automatic CSS. Allow yourself space to go slow. Allow yourself time to tinker. Just tinker with things. Add a class here, add a class there. See what the classes do. Go down that list in the cheat sheet and just say, oh wow, I can do things to images. Let me drop an image on this page. Let me play around with some of the things that I can do to images with utility classes. Let me try to build one of those cards and use some variables. Just tinker, experiment, right? Read the documentation, watch more of my tutorials, immerse yourself in ACSS for a weekend or a week or 2 weeks. Give yourself the time and space. If you think I'm going to install ACSS and just start whipping up websites, you're going to frustrate yourself. There is a learning curve, okay? There are things to learn and understand. There are things that need to be tinkered with. Give yourself the time and space to do that. And here's what I will promise you. When you've built a website with Automatic CSS and you've started to build your second website with Automatic CSS and your confidence is growing, you're getting faster with things, you're going to reach a point where you kind of come to the conclusion that you don't ever want to build a website without Automatic CSS ever again. And the real test to prove this will be when you've kind of built 2 or 3 sites with Automatic CSS and you have a site that you built a long time ago and you have to go edit something on it, you're going to open up that site and you're going to start to go make the changes and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I wish I had Automatic CSS on this site. I wish it was built with Automatic CSS. And that's how you know just how game-changing and truly powerful a framework like Automatic CSS is. If you try to go too fast, if you try to expect yourself to not really have a learning curve, you're going to be very frustrated. If you give yourself time, you give yourself space, you allow yourself to tinker and play and experiment and just enjoy the features that are available to you in Automatic CSS without any pressure to make things happen too quickly. If you use the support group, if you use our dedicated support staff, you are absolutely going to fall in love with Automatic CSS. The only people who get frustrated with it are the people that try to rush in and they expect that there's going to be no learning curve and they expect that it's just going to be, oh, everything is super easy and I don't need to read anything and I don't need to watch anything and it should just all be magically intuitive. We're talking about complex things here. Okay, so it's not magic. There is no magic bullet. Just like with everything, you have to put a little work into it, but you're going to get confidence quickly and you're going to be able to use it very quickly. And then you're going to love it and it's going to become invaluable to your workflow. All right, that's it. If you have any questions, I would love to help you. Comment below, reach out to our support staff, get help in the support community. We're all here. On top of the framework being invaluable and powerful, we try to build the best support network possible, the best education network possible, and that's yet another benefit that you get with Automatic CSS over every other framework. They're not out there trying to educate you. They're not out there teaching you best practices. They're not out there making you a better developer. We're doing that. We're supporting you in all of your efforts, okay? So stay with us, stick with us, get involved in the community, and you will prosper.